The Ledger of Shadows, Secrets That Should Have Stayed Hidden. Chapter 1. The Discovery. It started innocently enough. My uncle, a retired accountant, passed away unexpectedly in 2018. He wasn't a particularly wealthy or mysterious man, just an ordinary guy who lived an ordinary life. At least that's what I thought. After his funeral, my family was tasked with clearing out his house. It was the kind of tedious, emotional work that everyone dreads. As we sorted through his belongings, we stumbled upon a small, locked filing cabinet in his study. None of us had ever seen it before, and my uncle hadn't left a key. Curious, we pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside, we found an old leather-bound ledger, a few faded photographs, and a bundle of yellowed envelopes. The ledger caught my attention immediately. Its cover was worn, and the pages inside were filled with meticulous handwriting, rows of numbers, and names I didn't recognize. At first, I assumed it was related to his work, but as I flipped through the pages, I noticed something strange. The names were paired with cryptic notes in the margins, phrases like debt settled, unaccounted, and missing. Some of the entries were crossed out entirely, as if someone had deliberately erased them from existence. My curiosity got the better of me. I decided to take the ledger home, thinking I could unravel its mystery. That was my first mistake. Chapter 2. The Missing Names. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with the ledger. Most of the entries were dated from the late 1980s to the early 2000s. The names meant nothing to me, but a few of the notes stood out. One read, E. Carlson, last seen May 12, 1997. Another, J. Lewis, investigation ongoing. I started Googling the names. At first there was nothing, but then I hit on E. Carlson. To my shock, I found an old news article about a woman named Emily Carlson who had gone missing in 1997. Her case had never been solved. The details matched the note in the ledger exactly. My heart raced as I cross-referenced more names. Again and again, I found links to unsolved disappearances, accidents, and mysterious deaths. What was my uncle involved in? Chapter 3. A Call from the Past. That evening, I shared my findings with my dad. He looked visibly shaken. Your uncle used to work for some, let's say, unconventional clients, he admitted reluctantly. Back in the 80s and 90s, he took on private accounting jobs for people who wanted their finances kept off the books. You mean criminals? I asked. He hesitated. Not exactly. At least, I don't think so. But he used to joke about knowing things he shouldn't. I thought he was kidding. It was clear my dad didn't want to delve deeper, but I couldn't let it go. That night, as I pored over the ledger again, my phone buzzed. The number was blocked. I hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, low and gravelly, spoke. Leave it alone. Excuse me, I stammered. The ledger. Drop it. Burn it. Forget you ever saw it. The line went dead before I could respond. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. Someone knew I had it. Chapter 4. The Shadows. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Cars idled too long outside my house. A man in a baseball cap loitered across the street for hours. One night, as I walked home from the grocery store, I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned, no one was there. I considered going to the police, but stopped myself. What would I even say? That my dead uncle's ledger might be connected to decades-old disappearances? It sounded insane. Instead, I turned to Reddit. I posted anonymously in a true crime forum, describing the ledger without giving too many details. The responses were immediate. Some users suggested it was a list of victims. Others thought it might be tied to a secret society or underground organization. A few warned me to be careful, echoing the caller's words. Leave it alone. One message stood out. It was from a user named Silent Witness 89. They claimed to recognize one of the names in the ledger and asked me to DM them. Against my better judgment, I did. Chapter 5. Silent Witness. Silent Witness 89 turned out to be a woman named Laura. She told me her brother Mark had disappeared in 1993. His name was in the ledger with the note, unaccounted. She said their family had always suspected foul play, but never had proof. When I shared more details from the ledger, she became emotional. These people, they're all connected, she said. I don't know how, but they are. Laura and I decided to investigate further. We created a spreadsheet of all the names and notes, cross-referencing them with public records and old news articles. Patterns began to emerge. Many of the names were linked to a defunct company called Meridian Holdings. It had been shut down in 2001 amid allegations of money laundering and fraud, but its key players had disappeared before they could be prosecuted. The deeper we dug, the more dangerous it felt. Laura started receiving anonymous calls just like I had. One night, someone threw a brick through her window with a note attached. Stop digging. Chapter 6. The meeting. Laura and I decided to meet in person. We chose a public coffee shop in the city, hoping it would be safe. She brought a folder of documents she'd compiled, including photos and financial records tied to Meridian Holdings. As we compared notes, a man in a suit entered the shop and sat a few tables away. He didn't order anything, he just watched us. Do you know him? Laura whispered. I shook my head, my pulse quickening. We decided to leave separately. I took the folder with me, promising to scan the documents and share them later. That night, I noticed a black sedan parked near my apartment. It was still there the next morning. Chapter 7. The Break-In. A few days later, I came home to find my apartment ransacked. The ledger was gone. So was Laura's folder. I called her immediately, but she didn't answer. Panic set in as I checked Reddit, only to find that her account had been deleted. I drove to her house, but it was empty. Neighbors said she'd packed up and left without warning. I tried to convince myself she'd gone into hiding, but deep down, I feared the worst. Chapter 8. The Warning. With the ledger and documents gone, I had nothing left to investigate, but the fear didn't go away. The black sedan followed me everywhere. Anonymous calls continued, each one more threatening than the last. You've been warned, the voice growled during the final call. This is your last chance. I moved to a new city a few months later, cutting ties with everyone who knew about the ledger. For a while, the paranoia faded, but every so often I'd see a familiar car in my rearview mirror or catch a stranger staring a little too long. I knew they were still watching. Chapter 9. The Final Revelation. Years later, I received an unmarked package in the mail. Inside was a USB drive. Hesitant but curious, I plugged it into an old laptop. The drive contained scanned pages of the ledger, along with new names and dates. One entry made my blood run cold. My name, listed with the note, account closed. Chapter 10. The Return of Silent Witness. 3 days after receiving the USB, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. It simply said, "We need to meet." Attached was a video file. The footage showed Laura, alive but visibly shaken, sitting in a dark room. She whispered urgently, "They're not just watching. They're controlling everything. Meridian never stopped. We need to expose them." She listed a location, a remote cabin in the woods, and told me to bring the USB. Against my better judgment, I went. Chapter 11. The Cabin. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by dense forest. When I arrived, Laura was waiting. She looked thinner, more gaunt than I remembered. She explained that Meridian Holdings wasn't just a shell company. It was a front for a powerful network that eliminated anyone who posed a threat to their operations. The ledger had been their Achilles heel, and my uncle had stolen it as leverage. "They've erased people," she said, "entire families, and they're coming for us." Chapter 12. The Last Stand. We decided to use the USB to expose Meridian. Laura had set up a secure server to upload everything we had, but as we worked, the power cut out. Outside, the sound of tires on gravel echoed through the silence. A group of men approached the cabin, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "We don't have much time, Warren," Laura whispered. "If they get this USB, it's over." We split up. Laura ran to the back of the cabin to create a diversion, while I tried to upload the files using a portable hotspot. The men broke through the front door, shouting orders and overturning furniture. My heart pounded as the progress bar inched forward. 50%, 60%. A gunshot rang out. I froze, fearing the worst. Then Laura's voice echoed from outside. "Run." Chapter 13. Escape and Exposure. I grabbed the USB and bolted through the woods, branches whipping against my face. The men chased me, their flashlights bobbing wildly behind me. I didn't stop until I reached a nearby highway where a passing car picked me up. The files hadn't fully uploaded, but I still had the USB. The next day, I contacted a journalist I trusted and handed everything over. Within weeks, the story broke, exposing Meridian Holdings and its decades of corruption, disappearances, and crimes. Law enforcement launched an investigation, and several high-ranking officials were arrested. But Laura was never found. Chapter 14. The Cost of Truth. Months later, I received another package in the mail. Inside was a photograph of Laura and me at the cabin, taken from a distance. On the back, someone had written, "You were warned." I moved again, but the paranoia never faded. Every creak in the night, every stranger's glance felt like a threat. The USB is hidden now, and I don't know if I'll ever feel safe. The cost of truth is higher than I ever imagined. Chapter 15. The legacy of the Ledger years have passed, and Meridian Holdings has all but faded from public consciousness. The arrests made headlines for months, but the real depth of their operations remains buried. People moved on, as they always do, forgetting the names of the victims and the revelations of the investigation. But I haven't forgotten. I've since dedicated my life to uncovering hidden networks like Meridian. I work under pseudonyms, digging into dark corners of the internet and quietly passing on information to journalists and activists. Every lead feels like a step closer to finding Laura, though part of me fears what I'll discover if I do. One night, while working on another case, I received a familiar email address in my inbox. It was from Silent Witness 89. The message was short: "I'm alive. Stop looking." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Was it really her, or was it someone else keeping me in check? I replied, asking for proof, but the email bounced back. I haven't heard from her since. The ledger sits in a safety deposit box, untouched for years. I still dream about it, its pages filled with names and secrets. Sometimes I wonder if I should destroy it once and for all. But a part of me knows that as long as it exists, so does the chance for justice. The truth doesn't die. It waits, hidden in the shadows, for someone brave or foolish enough to bring it to light.